Hello, my friends. Today I'm talking about one of the most important subjects when it comes to metabolic health that we can discuss: visceral fat and chronic inflammation. And I've got a special guest with me today whose opinion I promise you're going to want to hear. When you hear this guy's age and see his physical ability now versus how he used to be, his story is even better than mine. So please stay with us, listen to this. It may run long. If so, I promise the information is going to be worth it. You can listen to this as a podcast or you can watch it. We're both fairly good looking, so I don't think it's going to hurt you if you watch this, but you can just listen to it like a podcast and do other things at the same time. We're actually live with my private group, our community. They'll be able to ask questions to Dr. O'Mara. You can watch this on YouTube when I post it or listen to it as a podcast, but only tribe members get to ask my experts questions. So let me bring Dr. O'Mara. He stepped out of the screen momentarily. Here he comes. Here he is. All right. Hello, doctor. How's it going?
Oh, it's going really good, Dr. Berry. How are you?
I'm doing great. If I was any better, I'd need a special permit. You and I have been trying to make this conversation happen for a while, and I'm glad we're finally able to do it. So welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience.
Absolutely. So we're live inside of our private community right now, so we'll only be getting questions from them. And if you don't mind, I'll pop a few of those on the screen as we go along.
Absolutely.
Questions that are relevant, so you can kind of expound on those. I want to start with an image, if you don't mind. I want you to tell us, what is this an image of?
Sure. So this is an image of some analysis that we do that we have figured out and looking at a particular biomarker in the body, visceral fat, that it relates to not only health, but specifically performance. So as you get rid of this interesting but very dangerous tissue in your body, you can just perform better. So this guy to the left is about the same age as me, but he's got a much higher amount of visceral fat than I do on the right. And so the image allows us to analyze and track this interesting biomarker that relates to performance. So the angle formed by the leg and the knee relative to the spine or the torso is dramatically different in the two images, and it relates to performance. So it's, health. Really, biology is definitely mathematical. There's a proportional relationship between disease and how well you perform. We just haven't really been looking at the right markers, in my opinion. I honestly think we've been distracted for decades too long with cholesterol, and we really should be looking at things that relate much more specifically to a person's level of health, their performance, and really their quality of life. So this image captures that. And it's what I do with my client patients. I track these particular angles to as they eliminate visceral fat, they start performing better. So it's a nice way to quantify performance.
And tell us, if you don't mind, your age when this picture was taken on the right.
So that was me about 6 months ago. So I was about 50. I was 59 at the time.
59-year-old sprinting. So I wonder how many people in their 50s or 60s or 70s can remember the last time that they actually sprinted, and do you even still dare to dream that you'll ever sprint again for the rest of your life? If you follow me, I think you know what my answer to that would be, and I think Dr. O'Mara's answer is the same. It may have been a few years since you sprinted, but if you can still fog a mirror, which means you ain't dead yet, then there is hope that you can one day sprint again and do other physical things that you probably just thought, no, that those days are behind me now. I'm 54 and you're currently 59. Is that correct?
No, I'm currently 60 right now.
Oh, 60. So he's out of his 50s. He's moved on to the next decade. And so do not think for 1 minute that 50 is too old, 60 is too old. That might be a nice story you tell yourself, but in reality, it's just not true. Tell us, Dr. O'Mara, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started in this conversation.
Sure. So I grew up in the Washington D.C. area, a typical background, government worker. My dad, and I went to college at Penn State, studied law enforcement, and worked in as a police officer in southern New Jersey, and did undercover narcotics work. Really had interesting experience doing that, and then decided I wanted to go to law school and worked as a criminal prosecutor for 3 years before deciding that I wanted to go to medical school. I just had this intense interest in science. I couldn't shake it. And I was frustrated professionally with not being able to optimize the criminal justice system. So I took a job as a night watchman, wearing a polyester uniform, sat and studied all night long, and got good enough grades to get into medical school and get a scholarship courtesy of the Army. And studied hard in medical school and became an emergency medicine physician, and served in U.S. Army active duty, and had opportunities to take care of the president, the vice president, 3 secretaries of state, and knew how to do executive wellness, executive health for the most important people in the world. Decided to do that for hedge fund and private wealthy individuals. And then I noticed I couldn't get those people really interested in being healthy. And I was unhealthy at the time too. I'd, listened just like you to the lectures in medical school, and I thought fat was bad. So I was terrified of fat and walked around the hospital drinking skim milk and chocolate powder in the skim milk. And I became overweight. And a young patient told me about, at the time, the paleo diet. And I said, I never heard of it. What's the paleo diet? And I went home and read about it. And Ken, I don't know why, just a switch flipped in my mind, and it made inherent sense. So it was so sensible to me. I sent the article off to my 2 best friends in medical school and figured they would do it with me. They gave it the Heisman. They pushed it away. They wouldn't have anything to do with it. It took my best friend 10 years to eventually cut out carbohydrates. And at the time, I had an enlarged prostate. I had erectile dysfunction. I had eczema. I had restless leg syndrome, so I kicked my legs all night long. I snored all night long because I had obstructive sleep apnea. I had Barrett's esophagus, so I was being biopsied with an EGD every 3 months. I got so good at it that I wouldn't even use anesthesia. They put that thing wide awake down my throat, and they would continually biopsy for looking for cancer, because that's how bad my aggressive Barrett's esophagus was. And I had hypertension, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and I was a mess, and that young man told me I would lose weight. So I do these things. I cut out processed foods. I am like all in. And he never once told me. So it wasn't because of autosuggestion or the placebo effect that I did the paleo diet that my medical problems would improve. I didn't anticipate that. I just thought I'd lose weight. And then one day I recognized that I was peeing hard into the toilet after normally been dribbling for a few years, and waking up 4 to 5 times a night, and just the weakest urine stream. And now I was peeing like a teenager again. And I was furious because I had this epiphany. I felt like everything I put my heart and soul into professionally as an emergency medicine physician, taking care of the most important person in the world, the president of the United States. And I felt like a fraud, like what I was taught was nothing more than some sort of subterfuge, because I just did not ever grasp that a diet, eating healthy, a lifestyle, could not only improve my symptoms, but in the case of my conditions, every one of them went away. And so I walked from my very lucrative position as an emergency medicine physician and took a position as a researcher, because I was compelled to find out how this was possible. And I just was very frustrated. So that brings me up to today. I became a researcher and started researching the intervention of life strategies to improve and optimize health. And I am the happiest and the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life.
Yeah, same for me. My story very much echoes yours, and it's I tell people part of the reason I'm so active on social media is trying to make up for the damage I did back when I gave just egregious nutrition advice. My nutrition advice used to consist of, "Oh, just join Weight Watchers." It literally came out of my mouth. I can't tell you how many thousand times the first 5 years of my medical practice. So today we're going to be talking about visceral fat, chronic inflammation, and probably some other stuff thrown in as well. And Lama does in our private community's got a question. How can you differentiate between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat? How can you tell the difference at home? How can a doctor tell the difference? And also, why is it so important to differentiate the two, doctor?
Okay, so to answer that question, because that's what I study, the best gold standard for studying visceral fat is an MRI. But I will tell you up front that that is pretty pricey. I hope that that price will come down as we make awareness of this interesting biomarker more prevalent. I think the demand will increase and that price will cut down. Right now, it's being used just to chase disease and make money off of it. And we need to flip it and turn it into something that we measure wellness and optimize people. So an MRI would be my first recommendation. A CT scan would also do a great job, but it would expose you to radiation. The MRI does it with higher resolution and with less radiation. A DEXA scan uses a smaller amount of radiation, but it still uses radiation, and it doesn't image the fat. It doesn't allow you to see also fat in your muscle. So the MRI, and we'll get into probably some of those images of what it looks like inside the body and fat inside your skeletal muscle, which you really should be aware of. But a DEXA scan is a more affordable way of quantifying. So it's just a number. But in my experience, it doesn't really motivate people that much. Numbers don't motivate. Yeah, they have to. You got to see that disease. When your eyes look at disease in your body, you get very, very upset and you get very motivated. And that's what you need to make lifestyle changes. Now, the poor man's way of assessing visceral fat, and I'll share this secret with you, and maybe when we get some images, I can make people believers, is through this proxy called deep subcutaneous fat. And deep subcutaneous fat corresponds to visceral fat. The interesting thing about deep subcutaneous fat is it's outside your body, and it's concentrated in one particular area posteriorly, and that is in your love handles. So I'm revealing it for the first time with Dr. Berry's show here to let you know that maybe we have to study it more. But anecdotally, when I look on MRIs, deep subcutaneous fat corresponds very closely to love handles. So you can just reach back behind you and push in. Don't necessarily pinch. You got to push that in down in your back, the deepest part of your back, and see how much tissue you got back in there. And that will give you an idea of how much visceral fat that you have in there. You really want none. But the best thing is to do an MRI. But if you take a look and feel your love handles, that will let you know you've got some work to do.
Yes. Now, Neil has a question. What at-home methods can we use to gauge visceral fat? I always recommend people check their waist to height ratio. And that's the only at-home method I know that's going to give you a rough marker of your visceral fat. Anything else? And what do you think about the waist to height ratio measurement?
Yeah, I think it's great. Another one besides the waist to height ratio is the sagittal abdominal diameter. So the sagittal abdominal diameter, I'll just stand up, is basically from the point between my two fingers here. So if you measure the diameter of your abdomen from your anterior, your umbilicus, your belly button to your back, that gives you a pretty good idea of what your sagittal abdominal diameter is. And also that it's dynamic. So you don't want it to be necessarily dynamic, but the more dynamic it is, the more visceral fat has impacted your health. So for instance, a 16-year-old and 18-year-old who's healthy, who has not had much influence of visceral fat, will have very little to no change in their sagittal abdominal diameter standing up to supine. But a an adult that has had the influence of visceral fat inside of them. Maybe they don't even have visceral fat because they got rid of it, but it's influenced them. They'll have a dynamic change between the sagittal abdominal diameter when they're standing up and when they're laying down in proportion to how much inflammation and disease has affected them. And what's happening is their anterior abdomen has been damaged by the influence of all these inflammatory markers from visceral fat that have leaked out, cytokines and adipokines and IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor. And so you literally can't hold your guts in anymore. And that is the story of the dad bod. Weak muscles, they cannot hold their own guts in anymore. You could surgically remove all the visceral fat that they have inside of them, and they still will have a protuberant abdomen. And the 16 to 18-year-old has not had that influence. They'll have this nice flat abdomen. So what we find happening in my client patients that I educate them on and give them strategies for eliminating visceral fat is their abdomens become flat like they formerly had when they were teenagers. So it's an exciting observation when that achievement, when it happens. And it's really reflects the absence of visceral fat in your body beginning to heal those damaged tissues.
Now, this is an example of what you're talking about, being able to visualize the visceral fats.
Yeah. So that top image shows a really healthy individual. They got a nice flat oval shaped abdomen. This might be what you would imagine a slice through your abdomen when you were about 16 or 18. This individual is a friend from the Army National Guard, Gabe. He's 28 in this photograph. And what you want to see is a lot of dark. So the dark are the muscles and the enteric organs within the abdomen. And fat shows up on an MRI as white. So you want a minimum amount of white. You want mostly dark like Gabe. And he's got a six-pack, and that little slit at the top of his abdomen there is his belly button where the air goes down. So that kind of, and he's got a nice thin layer, subcutaneous fat, and subcutaneous fat is really good. That's a good fat. It's particularly superficial subcutaneous fat, just like Gabe has. But the visceral fat is the white in the center of Gabe's stomach. It's just a little bit. That's very inflammatory and associated or causal with numerous forms of chronic disease, including the bad ones, the big killers, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, leading to heart attacks and strokes. The bottom image is offered in comparison, contrast to Gabe, and that is an individual is filled, his name is Asaf, he's filled with visceral fat. He's mostly, almost entirely visceral fat inside of him. And he also has a large, robust amount of subcutaneous fat. But unfortunately, the dangerous kind of subcutaneous fat, the deep subcutaneous fat. So, and notice also Asaf's muscles are smaller. So what we find is as you increase visceral fat, it starts to accelerate sarcopenia and atrophy or loss of your muscles. And not only that, but it impairs muscular hypertrophy. So what that means is as you accumulate visceral fat, it makes it harder for you to put on muscle mass. So if you're wondering, if you're listening today and you're in the 40s or 50s or 60s, and you think your days are long past and you can't put on muscle and you're having frustrations with that, get rid of your visceral fat and you'll be able to put on muscle again and increase that hypertrophy that a lot of bodybuilders and just average men and women want to be able to put on muscle and lose fat. Your goal there is to get rid of that visceral fat.
Yes. And a great many people, when they first start meat heavy keto, ketovore or carnivore, they lose that initial water weight, right? But then they don't lose weight for a while, sometimes a month or two, but yet they notice that they're losing inches. And I encourage everybody to buy a Taylor's tape when they start eating a proper human diet and take their measurements once a week, maybe even more often than that. And what there's like, dude, I've lost 18 inches, but I haven't lost a pound on the scale. just tell us what's going on with that body recomposition when people are,
Yeah.
because that can't be water weight. They're not losing water weight from around their waist and their hips and their thighs. What's going on with that?
Yeah, well, after scanning 6,000 abdomens, 6,000 people, for the National Science Foundation, what we found out is people are both simultaneously losing dangerous fat while they're building healthy muscle. And so this is the problem with people that just follow a scale, a bathroom scale, and just tracking a number. You don't really know what you're losing: muscle, water, or fat, dangerous fat or good fat. So the MRI allows you to see that. And I remember a firefighter who's in his 30s was trying so hard. He was overweight. He was trying so hard to get healthy. He was following our protocols for the National Science Foundation, but he didn't lose any weight. And he came and got scanned, and we showed him why. He put on a huge amount of muscle and lost all this visceral fat. And he broke down, started crying, that full-grown firefighter, because he was so relieved at being able to see that. So be very careful about following numbers, especially numbers on bathroom scales. They're just not reliable to tell you what's going on. So in this image here that we're looking at, the individual at top is an MRI on a client patient who's filled with visceral fat. You can see very little darkness again because he has small muscles on the sides of his abdomen called the oblique, and his six-pack on the top are quite small. And then the scan at the bottom, to contrast it, is enormously healthy individual, and he is almost entirely dark tissue because he's wall-to-wall muscle inside of him. His visceral fat is the smallest little thing in midline. It's just a teeny tiny bit, and he's got enormous six-pack. His muscles literally are kissing him, his six-pack there. And then to the right of these two abdominal scans are their respective legs. So this is important. If you've never probably heard this before, and I'm excited to share it with Dr. Barry and his audience. These are muscles through the thighs, through the lower extremity of these individuals. The individual at top that has a lot of visceral fat, he has a lot of white streaks that you can see in his leg muscles. That's called muscle fat. And the technical term for it is myosteatosis. But it's just fatty infiltration of the muscles, or also just fat muscle replacement. It's just muscle tissue being replaced by fat. Very inflammatory. We see the muscles starting to shrink both in size and performance. So if you're listening today and you're in the ages of 40, 50s, or 60s, this is most likely happening to your legs and your muscles all over your body, and you have no idea. And if they were to start to read this, it's completely ignored by the conventional healthcare system. We would warn people that you need a change of course in your life. Now, compared to the legs below, these muscles are like filet mignon. This is like tenderloin. This is an Olympic sprinter. His legs are free of any of those fatty infiltrates. And because we see correlating to the amount of visceral fat you have, the amount of fatty infiltrates in your muscles. Both of these scans were read as normal by the radiologists who read this, but they couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, these are not normal. This individual, it might be common, the image at top, lots of people have visceral fat and may not be aware of it, but it's not normal. It's not healthy. You should have been warned that you could have a heart attack anytime with the amount of visceral fat that you have. Inflammatory substances likely accumulating and damaging your coronary arteries, and your beautiful arteries all over your body. All your tissues and organs are affected by visceral fat. And the individual at the bottom should have been said, you have the healthiest abdomen I've ever seen. Please tell me how you live, what you do, so I can emulate you. So I like to educate people on the importance of these biomarkers and how they all relate to each other. The story of health is ubiquitous and consistent throughout the body. It's not separated or isolated just to one particular tissue. You might have cancer that goes to one particular tissue, but when you're healthy all over. And when you have chronic disease, and these biomarkers are all over. And visceral fat is the first expression of chronic disease that we found in our study for the National Science Foundation. It's the very first thing that starts going wrong. And yet it's completely ignored by conventional healthcare. So I'm super happy to be here today and educate you and your audience about this.
I love it. And the guy on the bottom left has the largest psoas major muscles I have ever seen in my career. But you said something when the radiologist was interpreting these MRIs, they're both read as normal. And it's been probably 4.5 years ago, I made a video on this channel about fatty pancreas. And I was doing research about it. And I read a couple of studies, but then when I started looking at images, I've actually found a radiologist, and he's like, "Oh, this person has a little fatty infiltration in the pancreas. It's ubiquitous. Everybody has it. We don't even comment on it on the radiology report." And I was like, "That literally defines type 2 diabetes and severe inflammation." And so I actually called a radiologist friend of mine. And I'm like, if you see fatty infiltration in the pancreas, because everybody's heard of fatty liver at this point, surely to God, you're living under a rock if you haven't heard of fatty pancreas or fatty liver. But many people and many doctors have never heard of fatty pancreas. And I called my radiologist friend. I'm like, if you see that, do you put that in the radiology report? And he's like, no. He said, dude, literally 8 out of 10 adults who we do an abdominal scan on, they're going to have fatty infiltration of the pancreas. We typically don't comment on it because why would we? Because it's not really a marker for anything. And I was like, really? Okay.
I know, it's crazy.
Thanks for the information. I was just checking. I'm doing a YouTube video. And so then he got interested, and hopefully now he's changed his practice and he does comment on fatty pancreas. But so many doctors don't know that if you see fatty infiltration in the liver, yes, of course, but in the pancreas, that's a big damn deal. If you see that marbling, if somebody's having thigh pain or calf pain and you get a CAT scan or an MRI and you see that fatty infiltration in the muscle, that is a huge red flag metabolic marker that this person is at high risk of some event happening in their near future if you don't counsel them on how to change that.
Yes.
So fatty tongue, fatty heart, fatty kidney, these are all documented things that the average primary care doctor or emergency department doctor, they've never heard of it, and they have no idea that it's as important as it is. Riff on that for us. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it's really a very critical biomarker when you have a replacement of healthy organ tissue with fatty infiltration like pancreas, but it's downstream to visceral fat that starts in your childhood. So I've scanned my kids and I saw them, as young as 4 and 5 years old, having visceral fat early on, very, very small amounts. They're beautiful abdomens, really teeny, even less than the Olympic sprinter. But that accumulates over a lifetime. And then you see fatty liver, you see fatty pancreas, myosteatosis, fat replacement in the muscle, fat around the heart. All of these problems are downstream to them and they don't comment on it. But what do they opine about and harp patients on all the time is cholesterol. And, I like to ask the question, can you name one human being that ever got control of their cholesterol and lowered it and said it completely changed my life? It just doesn't happen.
Right.
But if you're listening today and you get rid of your visceral fat, you will have an entire new body and with it, an entire new life. Because that means you'll eradicate also all of the organ fat, all the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And what I think is happening, and I've asked a pathologist friend of mine to try to help me out determine this, is not only does fat start replacing muscle tissue in the skeletal muscle, but what we think is now happening is the same process, fatty infiltration within the smooth muscle, of our endocrine system, so our glands, our gastrointestinal tract, and our arteries, our venules, and capillaries. So what we found happening with our patients and clients and subjects in our study is, as visceral fat is eliminated, their arteries became visible. So now you can see visible pulses. If my camera was higher resolution, I showed to you, but all my pulses you can visualize. Just imagine being an intern, right? Kenny, you're trying to do an ABG and you're trying to feel the daggone arterial pulse in the radial artery, or the brachial. And, but if you could see it, you're like, oh, wow. And we never really paid attention, I don't think, in conventional healthcare to the health of the vasculature from a visible physical standpoint, So that's what happens as we opened up got rid of visceral fat. The arteries open up, they became visible. And it just changed people's lives, their whole appearance, their whole body, their contours, all the biomarkers that we're now tracking and paying attention, all drastically change as you get rid of this visceral fat.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great question. Any healthcare provider watching this, and we have many, you'd be shocked how many healthcare providers are interested or hungry for this information now, because they're seeing, oh, this is something real. How many of you guys have put somebody on Crestor or Repatha, and they come back at the 3 or 6 month follow-up and said, doctor, that Crestor changed my life. I'm a new person now. No one ever. Right. And so you mentioned reversing coronary artery disease and other arterial plaquing and disease. I have seen numerous people, when they adopt what I call a proper human diet, which is basically eliminating all the grains, eliminating all the sugars, and eliminating all the vegetable seed oils, eating, if they eat any plants, it's very low carb plants. It's more as a garnish than it is as the main course, eating lots of fatty red meat, egg yolks, plus or minus the white, depending, organ meats. What I've noticed is that their CAC scans either don't get worse as years go by, or they get better. And this goes also for CIMT. This goes for CT angiograms of the heart. I have several other physician friends who are doing the same thing you and I are doing. And they're like, oh, yeah, we see that all the time. And I actually talked to Dr. Agustin, who helped develop the CAC scoring system. And he said the average adult, their CAC score is going to go up about 20% a year. That's the average.
Wow.
And so anybody who got a CAC 12 months ago, adopted a proper human diet, very, very low carb, uninflammatory, lots of fatty red meat, and then repeat that CAC score in 12 months later, if it didn't go up 20%, you're winning.
Yeah.
And so what have you seen with regards to reversal of arterial disease by adopting a proper human diet? And obviously I know you're a big proponent of a proper human lifestyle as well. What have you seen?
Yeah. So what we would see is, first of all, we use an MRI and we evaluate or image the arterial system in the brain, because it's there's no motion artifact, unlike with the heart. People often ask, well, why don't you do the arteries in the heart? I'm worried about a heart attack. Well, the heart has dynamic motion, so we can get very good resolution of those arteries in the brain without that motion artifact. And the advantage of the MRI is it doesn't just image the cold calcified lesions that a CAC study, as good as that is, does. We can see those soft plaques as well. So what we found as the superior form of intervention for opening up those arteries is a meat-based diet. So the more people have a diet based on the consumption of good, healthy meat, the faster visceral fat went away and these arteries would open up. Now, I was shocked how fast the arteries were opened up. I was of the opinion that these, calcified, these, atherosclerotic cardiovascular, you've been in the operating room, I'm sure, when you're a resident, scraping out, doing those, endorectomies, carotid endorectomies. And that stuff is hard, but we saw these open up in months, from just dietary and lifestyle changes. So very much like you, it's meat-based. And what also accelerates is optimization of the microbiome. So I'm a big proponent now of eating fermented foods and eating them as a garnish. I liked how you said that earlier, and that's exactly the term I use. The entree, the main portion of the diet is good, healthy meat, and then just a little bit of ferments. And I recommend chewing them together. And then I also recommend fasting and other lifestyle strategies to help accelerate that. And most of the other lifestyle strategies, like sunshine, sprinting, maximum intensity exercise, and use of asana, that it has this benefit through production of increasing nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is this wonderful molecule that I think we and particularly the carnivore community and a meat-centered way of eating should pay more attention to nitric oxide, because it really plays such an important role. And this is interesting, Ken. I call it my human dashboard, because my clients have visible pulses. They get them. They can go out and they get corroboration, instantly feedback, sort of like you might look at your dashboard when you're driving. They don't have to wait for the doctor. They just go out in the sunshine and they see the magnitude of their pulse arteries really opening up instead of just a little bit when they go out in the sunshine. So it says, very good. When you go out in that sunshine, the sunshine is good. It produces nitric oxide, and it improves the cardiovascular, the perfusion of blood flow. And the same thing when they go into a sauna. Their magnitude, their pulses are small, but after they've been in the sauna, much more magnitude of those pulses. And I'm not just talking about pulse rate, heart rate. I'm talking magnitude, like blood flow. You want more blood flow going to your tissues, offloading to your precious organs and your cells so that they become as optimally healthy as possible. The third one is sprinting. So if you jog, those visible pulses do not increase as much. Your heart rate might increase a little bit, but your amplitude, your magnitude, the amount of blood bolus going through those arteries is not as enhanced in jogging as much as when you sprint. Then you get these massive production of those pulses. And the fourth one I found out is fasting. So fasting has this effect in increasing your nitric oxide. And interesting, I know you've interviewed Paul Saladino, and I was on Paul's show. So Paul convinced me to be a scientist. He appealed to me, try out honey. So I did it 2 times. And when I did it each time, my beautiful, much appreciated, highly valued visible pulses completely disappeared when I ate honey. And so it's through the inhibition that those carbohydrates have on the production of nitric oxide. So I just am not a fan, like you, of carbohydrates. I'm a fan of meat, sunshine, sprinting, the sauna, and fasting, and other stress hormetics, brief, intense kind of stressors to help optimize the human body.
Absolutely. I love that. And so I'll tell you, earlier today, I got up this morning, had a cup of coffee, went to the pasture. I've got hairless sheep or hair sheep that I have on the farm. And I was putting up a new paddock, and it's 95 degrees here in Tennessee. So I want you to tell me how many of your lifestyle hacks I was hitting this morning. I didn't have breakfast, so I was fasting. It was 95 degrees. I was wearing shorts and just a ball cap and shoes, and sweating like a horse. It's so humid and 95 degrees. I was out there for 4 hours. I didn't have to take any water with me. And so for 4 hours, I was in the sunshine, sweating like a horse, walking up and down hills, stringing out new electric fence to move my sheep to a new paddock. How many? I didn't sprint. I should have sprinted at least once. I may go out and do that later today, but so is being in the 95 degree heat, is that equivalent for somebody who can't afford a gym membership or a home sauna? Is that going to be just as good if I'm out in the 95 degree heat running up and down hills?
Well, not as good. The studies show the largest study ever done on sauna use, and by the way, it's dry finish that kind of rocks, is at 175 degrees to produce these miraculous little protein molecules called heat shock proteins, but they are produced even in smaller amounts with any exposure to heat. So it's proportional. And in the studies, it was dose dependent. So the longer you did it, the more benefit there was. So if you did it 1 to 2 days a week, it reduced the mortality rate from cardiovascular disease about 20 to 21%. But if you did it 4 to 7 times a week, it increased it up to 53% reduction in mortality. And all-cause mortality, meaning the death rate of death from all forms of disease and incidence of death, was reduced 45% across the board, just from 4 to 7 days of sauna use a week at about 15 minutes, and again, it's at 175 degrees. So the more heat. Now here's what I did when I deployed, since I'm still active duty in the Army National Guard part-time. And what we would do, because I couldn't get to a sauna, was I figured out, I got one of those $3.50 oven thermometers that go up to like 350 degrees. And I got 2 or 3 of them to test the accuracy. And I just went into vehicles and I rolled up the windows and I watched the temperature. And don't do this by yourself, but I went with a bunch of other buddies that also like to sauna and like to, be biological tough guys. And we just tracked those temperatures up to 200 degrees.
Yep.
In a vehicle.
I call that, Doc, I call that a redneck sauna. I go out in the driveway and I get in my black Dodge truck with the windows up in the middle of the summer. That's a redneck sauna. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can get your exposed. And you think about it, our ancestors, they were very persistent about trying to find sources of heat. And a lot of traditional people have some sort of practice, wigwams and things like that, of being exposed to heat, because it has been correlated. Our ancestors, I think, were far more in tune to picking up strategies that optimize them. And the reason is it saved their lives. They had this force of nature, anthropologically, we call it selection pressure, that caused them to not eat bad food and not sit around a campfire throwing down figs and dates, chasing carbohydrates, because they needed to be the healthiest as possible. They'd go out and hunt and work hard because their survival depended on it, and so did their quality of life. And so that's missing today. We don't have selection pressure. There's no force upon us acting in our lives that really motivates you and I to be really healthy. Now, you and I are, because we're enlightened medical professionals, and your audience is now enlightened following you. They know the value of it. But our ancestors, their survival depended upon it. So it really helped them make these kind of decisions, like, we got to find a source of heat. We got to do this because it makes us better at hunting, makes us better in our performance across everything that we have to do. And so, yeah, sauna is a really important strategy that I get my clients to do. And I recommend the dry finish over the infrared. Infrared is, infrared rays come from the sun, but nobody's talking about this, but I'm happy to run it by you, Ken. The sun infrared rays are very short. That energy we've been exposed to as species for a very, very long period of time. And it only penetrates the skin and maybe into the subcutaneous fat and just a little bit of the muscle. But the infrared rays that are in an infrared sauna are much more deep and much more penetrating. So I'm concerned that we have not yet adapted ourselves to that level of energy that's going so deep. So I just tell people, I got this bend, which, me, I just want to be more natural. And I said, just get natural heat. That's what you want. And get your infrared from the most beautiful, wonderful source that we could possibly get, the sunshine, and not some man-made contraption.
100% agree. The vast majority of the red light therapy units are just red LEDs anyway. Yeah. And the vast majority of the red light therapy research was done with red lasers. And those are, first of all, not the same thing at all. No. And so, I'm hugely disappointed with the red light therapy that a lot of people recommend. Now, Rebecca's got a great question for somebody who's been sitting around for a few decades, doctor, kind of just hanging out, right? Eating whatever, doing whatever. Now you've got all this fatty infiltration in your liver, your pancreas, your muscles. Can you reverse that? Hopefully the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, how would a complete newcomer who just stumbled on this video, sitting in the recliner right now, eating a ding dong, you're going to say, okay, Bubba, you got it. Here's how you start. Literally start today. Before bedtime, you're going to start doing this.
Yeah. So it's super important that you first eliminate processed foods. That's the most important thing that I recommend doing. The elimination of processed foods from your diet, Rebecca, will help you. You gotta stop pouring gasoline on the fire. So the processed, particularly carbohydrates and seed oils, and then food preservatives that are included, go down and disrupt your microbiome, is a confluence, a superstorm of disease-causing elements that come into your body. So that's the most important thing, is really getting control of your diet. And then secondly, I recommend a practice of fasting. And then as far as, and I recommend slowly starting to fast and get more acclimated to it, like our ancestors. I love Dr. Attia. Dude is way smarter than me, way more intelligent. But I look at us from an ancestral perspective. And we just would have been forced to fast because we couldn't always get that kind of food. And then I'm persuaded by the studies I see with autophagy, particularly at the 72-hour point, and the wonderful things that autophagy brings. And I think it's a big part of why we're seeing visible pulses and these magnificent changes in performance and appearance and quality of life in our clients. I think it has a strong correlation to fasting. So autophagy in one study in 2021 was measured in lysosome cells. And it was found that if you follow the amount of autophagy through chaperone-mediated autophagy activity in lysosomes, those with the highest amounts never went on and stroked again in a stroke study for people following stroke patients. And you know what happens, Ken? Yeah. If you have a stroke, you're going to have another one. Just atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease builds on, and it's the first stroke followed by a subsequent stroke, and maybe that one kills that person or not. But it's just a repetitive disease. But if you get autophagy, then it reverses this disease process and can stop that from happening again. And those with the lowest amount of CMA activity in that particular study always stroked again. So you really want to have fasting. You want to cut out processed foods, and you want to get sunshine, and you want to do sprinting. If you do those things, you're going to be fantastic. Those are really, really great ways. And the other thing I recommend always is optimizing your microbiome, which was really chiefly my most important strategy, is your microbiome. And it's a big complex. We could, Dr. Barry and I could do shows for, every day for a year on the microbiome alone. But suffice it to say, fall in love and learn small amounts of fermented foods and chew them together with meat. So you're mixing those microbes in as you masticate, as you chew, putting beneficial food microbes in with the food that you're chewing. So when it gets delivered, they're already set up for success going into your microbiome and contributing positively to your microbiome.
I love it. Now, Lisa's got a similar question, but she asked the key question at the end. At what age can we hope to reverse this? So is there an age cutoff? Is there an age where if someone comes to you and says, hey, be my doctor, and you're like, I'm sorry, dude, it's too damn late. It's over. Is there an age? And maybe you give us an example of a client you have or have had at an age that most people would think, no, they're done. There's no way you can help that person.
No. So I will encourage you. I had a client age 84, and I said, had a client. Unfortunately, he died in an MVA, a motor vehicle accident. But this guy, 84 years of age, was one of my longest clients. And when he called me up, he stuttered, could barely find words. And by the time he had completely, my hairs are standing up, you could see it, completely eliminated his visceral fat. This guy had lower visceral fat than any 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old of all my clients. This guy got that low. He eliminated his visceral fat. He would come over to my house. We would sprint together. This guy was completely turned around his speaking patterns. So healthy. So let that be an encouragement for you. You absolutely can. You cannot be, it's never too old to start eliminating your visceral fat and getting the benefits from it, because until you do, it's like a furnace that's blowing out dirty, caustic smoke, just causing inflammation throughout your body. And you don't know, your body doesn't know what health is until you get rid of it. And the conventional system has kept it from you because it kept it from Dr. Berry and I. It's not taught in medical school, and radiologists don't read it. Nobody works to get rid of it. And we're all in this gigantic distraction called cholesterol that we're chasing that makes money. But you wait, the minute Big Pharma figures out a pill to get rid of visceral fat, then they'll be all about this new discovered, important substance to work on. But you can get started today by just following things that Dr. Berry promotes. I follow Dr. Berry. I'm like, I would love to get on his show because he and I most align of all the physicians in this particular space. It's Dr. Berry that I like the most.
So we know for a fact that if you are 84 years of age or younger, this will work for you. There's documented evidence of that. So beyond 84, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But Dr. O'Mara has a documented case of an 84-year-old who had less visceral fat after just working this simple program, eliminating processed foods, carbohydrates, inflammatory things, seed oils, eating lots of fatty red meat, and sprinting. I'm sure you're not opposed to vigorous exercise in the bedroom as well. Any kind of vigorous exercise that gets your heart pumping, gets you breathing, gets you grabbing your knees, as we used to say in basketball, and then do that out in the sun. And it's literally that simple to reverse 90% of the visceral fat and the chronic disease and the chronic inflammation that you're currently suffering from. And just repeat, do those things, then repeat. And have some vitamin P, which stands for patience, and trust your body, because I feel like, Dr. O'Mara, that the default setting for the human body is vigorous, optimal health. And only if you're doing things that are what I call slow poisons, is your body not going to be at just the default setting, which is virile, vigorous, and potent, as G. Gordon Liddy used to say on his talk show that I listened to way a long time ago. But that's the default setting. And so a lot of people are like, no, my body's broken. My metabolism is broken. And I have to, break the news to them. No, it's not broken. You're just, you're doing shit but you're basically tripping your metabolism on a daily or a meal by meal basis. You're tripping it up. You're punching it in the face. You're kicking it in the groin. When you stop doing those things and start doing these few simple things that we're talking about in this video, your body will immediately start to heal. And I'm seeing lots of questions from the tribe. Like, how long does it take? Am I too old? Is it too late? No. None of that stuff is true. If you're 84 or younger, absolutely start today.
Yeah, the more things you do, the faster you eliminate visceral fat, the faster you eliminate fatty streaks in your muscles, in your organs, in your arterial system. So get started. The more things you do, you get a synergistic benefit. You'll have benefit just doing one thing, and just stopping processed foods. But if you do multiple things, really start living a healthier life, then they come together, and that's where we'd see the most dramatic elimination of visceral fat and then subsequent impact in lifestyle. So I'm a big believer in using the MRI to track these changes. And I love that term vigorous, because that's what I hear a lot in my followers online who start following my recommendations to start incorporating sprinting. It makes them feel vigorous again. And, ask yourself, when was the last time I felt vigorous? In many cases, it's probably takes you back to your teenage years or your 20s, unless, you are, living more optimally, eating more healthy, and then doing vigorous, inducing types of exercise. So sprinting is the single most important form of exercise I think a human being can do. it produces the most amount of myokines, which are, and another molecule called lactate, which are these messaging molecules that behave like hormones, and they send signals to other tissues distant in your body, apart from your legs, where they get produced in the large muscles when you sprint. These molecules go around and they tell your body to burn fat and to build muscle. But what we saw, Dr. Berry, is it burned the bad fat first and preferentially. So It got rid of visceral fat and it got rid of deep subcutaneous fat. And it was more preserving and sparing to superficial subcutaneous fat. Now, jogging and more chronic kind of endurance exercise had the opposite effect. It got rid of superficial subcutaneous fat more than deep subcutaneous fat. So we'd see all these distance runners that had large amounts of visceral fat still preserved inside of them. And moreover, we couldn't get rid of it. They wouldn't leave the body if they just kept running. But when we got them to stop running and start sprinting, then it left their body.
Do you remember which slide is the distance runner?
Yeah.
Sent me. Which one is that?
Yeah, it's one that is it's just two pictures, two MRIs, two abdominal scans right next to each other. Yep. I might be able to find it on my big screen here. Let
me see if I can find it here.
That's it. That's it right there. You pulled it
up. Okay. So tell us the difference here.
Yeah. So the image on the left, which is dated February 2017, you can see the white inside is this visceral fat in the center. And this is a CEO of a company. And this CEO is getting a second MRI image. And I'm disappointed because his visceral fat had not changed in the 3 months he was returning to get his visceral fat scan again. And so I asked him, are you cheating eating carbs? Are you drinking alcohol? Are you staying up at night and not sleeping, or having insomnia for some reason? Or are you stressed out? So those are the 4 big contributors to visceral fat that we asked right away. And he said no to all of them. He said, everything's going good. I'm sleeping good. I'm not drinking, and I'm not cheating. I'm just eating what I'm supposed to, eating clean. And then finally, the last question I asked him was, are you still running? You were a runner before. You stopped running, right? And you're sprinting now? And he put his head down and he admitted that, no, I'm still running. And it's a hard thing to get distance runners to stop. These endorphins, they get in the habit. And I ran 90 minutes a day, every day. You couldn't get me to stop running. And it was a very difficult thing to give up. But we convinced him, I said, we're going to kick you out of the study for the National Science Foundation. No more free MRIs, no more free medical exams for doctors. You're out of this study if you don't stop running and start sprinting. And so he did. And look what happened to him in this image on his right. The only change he did was he substituted sprinting for jogging. He didn't jog anymore, no more running. And he lost almost all his visceral fat, and then he grew muscles. So the MRI tech came barging in my office saying, Sean, this guy's got jacked. He's got enormous muscles. And when he came back for me to meet with him, I actually had to put him up against the wall and I begged him to tell me the truth if he was using like steroids or something, because it was such a dramatic change. So,
and this is in 2 months' time.
2 months, a 2 months period of time from stopping running. So my observation on this, when I see it happens several times, is when you stop running and you start sprinting, you get even better results than you simply start sprinting and never ran before. So there's something about the body being recovered. It's like a governor gets released when you stop the endurance exercise, and you can lose visceral fat even faster and put on muscle more. So if you're a jogger, just give it a try. Really, just listen to me. You can go back to running if you want, but just cut out completely distance running and just incorporate sprinting for 2 months and see what happens. Just give it a try.
Yeah, please give it a try. I love that. I love that concept, because you can always go back to eating junk food. If what we're saying doesn't work, it's not like you can't ever have it again.
Yeah.
Try what we're saying for 90 days. At the end of 90 days, if nothing's better, screw it. Go back to the junk food. Just give up the jogging, the chronic cardio, as Mark Sisson calls it. and sprint for 90 days. And then if it didn't work, you can always go back to jogging if you think that's what you want to do. I think that's fine. Lynn, let's see. Lori's got a question about, we talked about fasting earlier. And I don't really do longer fasts. I do anywhere from an 18 to 22 hour fast virtually every day. I eat 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day. That's just incorporated into my lifestyle. Every now and then I'll do a 48 hour if the family situation's right. What's your take on daily intermittent fasting, longer fasting? What do you believe about that?
All right. So let me tell you an N of one. Okay. It's an anecdotal experience. I'm going to true confession. I have a form of Asperger's. Okay. I'm sort of like Bill Gates. I'm high functioning, but boy, I can be really intense about things, very intentional. So I became aware of this one-legged, balance test where you stand on one foot with your eyes closed. It correlates to life expectancy. And I did that every day for 2 years in my kitchen. And I saw no improvement at all with my balance. I mean, I do it about 90 seconds, but the quality, how much I would move my leg, never really moved a bit. In terms of quality, it never really improved. My leg would I'd always wobble a little bit, but no change in 2 years. So I gave it up. I was kind of ticked off of that biomarker. I was like, well, I'm not going to do it anymore. I was kind of ticked. So I left it alone for about 4 or 5 years. And then I picked it up one more time. No change. Still where it was, 5 years earlier. And I thought, well, I did it for a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. And I just gave it up. And then I did something very different. I started extended fasting. And, I'm not a super big fan of it, but I heard that guy, Jack from Twitter, Jack Dorsey, he was fasting 3 days longer. 3 days. I said, that's a long time. I said, well, I thought about it. I said, yeah, our ancestors probably did. So I incorporated 3 days a week. I was doing that, and I did that for 3 years, 3 days a week. That's a big change for somebody who was doing intermittent fasting. And I got into it. And then after 3 years of doing that, I saw that, again, another article on that one-legged balance test. And I thought, well, let me try it again. Let me see where I'm at. Stood like a tree. Stood like a tree. That helped out Sean O'Mara's central nervous system. My vestibular optic network completely improved my balance within my inner ear from fasting. And nothing else changed. Nothing else changed. That's what I added in during those 3 years. And I stood like a 12-year-old kid. If you test it in your kids, they'll be able to stand much more still than you do as an adult. And but fasting was the one thing, extended fasting in particular, that allowed me to stand much more youthfully and have just superior balance. It's really, really interesting. So that's just one anecdotal experience. But during that time, I also got visible pulses. So my blood flow improved. So I think autophagy gave me visible pulses. And so I am a proponent of it. I think it has a lot of benefit. My sensory works better. I noticed going to like hockey games. I could watch my son's hockey game and I could track the puck much better. I could see what was going on. I could interpret. I'm like, this would be useful,
Yes.
to be in this highly ketogenic state to go out and hunt. So I knew how to throw that spear, work that bow and arrow, and chase this particular animal or fight, if I had to fight or defend myself. So it makes sense that nature would utilize ketogenic pathways for higher performance, but it took adaptation. When you first walk away, you're away from carbohydrates and you're not yet adapted to ketones and those ketogenic pathways, your performance degrades. So you have a period of adaptation. People call it keto flu. So don't just give it a try once or twice. You got to really give it a fair try, like we talked about with sprinting, and we've talked about in the past, like trying to cut out vegetables and give the carnivore diet a trial, a good decent trial, 2 to 3 months. Do extended fasting for 2 to 3 months and get yourself adapted so you can experience those longer periods of fasting. I think you'll have a lot of benefit.
I love it. We got great questions coming in from the tribe. What if for some medical reason, previous injury, you just can't sprint? What are some great alternative ways that you can get that all out, 100% all in vigorous exercise?
Yeah. So first, a public service announcement, a little visa, so we don't get ourselves in trouble. If you're older, and I mean like you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, you are very much at risk of getting a muscle strain. Now,
100%.
in the past, if you were like a 50-year-old, 40-year-old deer, I don't know how long deer live, you could sprint on a dime if a wolf came after you because you didn't have visceral fat. You didn't have chronic disease accumulating. But guess what? You guys, if you're listening, have it. And you cannot accelerate super fast. So the injury happens when you accelerate. So you must accelerate very, 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 very slowly. Otherwise, you're going to pull a muscle and you'll be super mad at Dr. Sean, and you'll even be mad at Dr. Barry for having Dr. Sean on talking about sprinting. So just very, very warm up and then slowly accelerate. And if you cannot sprint because you have injuries to your knee or you're just not able to for a variety of different reasons, then you can emulate. It's not a complete substitute. You could emulate perhaps sprinting on a stationary bike where you have against resistance and you accelerate. And a lot of studies that look at the benefit of maximum intensity exercise use a stationary bike to simulate sprinting and get these fantastic results. It's interesting if you've been following the studies, Dr. Barry, that the shorter we look at the period and the higher the intensity, the more benefit we see. Absolutely. That actually it's really challenging longer periods of less intensity exercise. I mean, you get equal, if not better, results in a much shorter period of time. So the other form is sprinting in a pool. You can sprint swim, or you can sprint standing up in a pool against water resistance. Some people who can't sprint on ground can sprint in a pool against water, just kind of sprint and get that kind of resistance. So there's other forms of exercise that emulate, but there's no true substitute for sprinting. Nothing completely substitute. Nothing will get you more shorter breath. Nothing will produce more myokines and a higher lactate quantity in a shorter period of time in your body than sprinting in just seconds. It's amazing.
What about full out on a rowing machine? Is that going to get you close?
Yeah, that's another one. And I do that. I've done a lot of rowing machine exercises. It's still not quite the same. You don't get quite as much of a expenditure and use, particularly of your lower extremities, where your larger muscle bodies are that get engaged when you're sprinting. And by the way, use all your muscles appropriately in sprinting. If you look at sprinters, they have beautiful arms and chests and shoulders, and they increase them as they sprint.
Yes.
Now, just the opposite with distance runners, marathoners, and ultra distance runners. The longer they do that distance running, they get more atrophy of their muscle tissues. And that leads and contributes to this terrible scourge that I hope you talk about in your audience too, sarcopenia. Yes. Literally, our muscles are wasting away as we age. And feeding that is visceral fat, and also a lack of, like what Dr. Barry said, vigorous activity. You want that vigorous, maximally testing kind of exercise. The two things I tell my clients that kept humans in the gene pool the longest and improved their quality of life was how fast you could sprint and how well you could fight. Now, we can't encourage people to go out and get in bar fights and the things. I used to do that when I was a cop. I had to do it for vocationally, but nothing taxes you more than sprinting and really fighting. So you kind of have to emulate a fight with resistance training, push-ups, pull-ups to exhaustion, body weight exercises. You can just get creative with it. You don't necessarily have to have really expensive, to get started, expensive set of weights and gym equipment. I have one client was kind of wealthy, went in, he bought a whole gym. This guy was wealthy. He bought a whole gym that was going out of business, drove like 5 states and got a truck and brought it.
Wow. That'd be nice.
Yeah, kind of resources. But you get started doing push-ups and pull-ups and, burpees and resistance training to exercise are another great ways of getting vigorous activity. And also reducing stress. So when you have this vigorous activity, that antelope, that's in Africa, that's being, stressed out by all the lions and tigers, milling around, their cortisol levels are going up because they're stressed out and waiting for this lion and tiger to attack. The minute that lion and tiger attacks and chases it, and it gets away, assuming it doesn't get eaten, caught, then it's reduced its cortisol because of the chase. It's part of nature. We're meant to have these vigorous, intense episodes of exercise. So if you get stressed out, you're at work, you get a bad email, you get a bad text, you get a bad report, you have a bad conversation with your boss or a client, drop and do maximum push-ups till you can fail and beat back that cortisol. Do not permit it to stay in there. You are a vigorous, vital human being. Optimize. Do not sit on that stress. Take care of your most important physical asset you'll ever own. It's your body. And you got to beat back that stress. Stress is a real killer.
That is a brilliant strategy. I'm going to immediately steal that from you. I'm a big fan of stoicism and basically deciding how a stressful situation is going to affect you, because if you decide to not be stressed out by it, then it literally, the house could be on fire and your cortisol could be rock bottom and your pulse be 60. If you just decide, oh, okay, I've got insurance, it's fine, I'm not even going to stress about this. But that's a brilliant strategy. If you get that phone call or that email, or your spouse is just showing their ass, don't argue. Don't do that. Just go in the bedroom and do as many push-ups as you can do, or do as many fast, high jumping jacks as you can do, or go out and run around the house 5 times as fast as you can. First of all, it'll freak your spouse completely out. But secondly, you're sinking that cortisol. Because that's what it's for, is either freeze, flight, or fight. That's what it's for. And so use it for that. Your body just got all stressed out because your boss just gave you a demotion. If you sit and stew on that, it's going to have negative effects. But if you literally go out and run down the road and back as fast as you possibly can, you actually put it to its evolutionary use.
Wait and see. Brilliant. If you're listening and you do this, it's going to change your life when it comes to stress. You can't, you can be stoic at, some situations, and try to mentate. But when a lion tiger is after to kill you, there are just some circumstances you just can't control. Your boss, what's happening, a report, something going on in the company, and you got to respond. We used to be able to migrate away from lions and tigers. Sometimes we could do that. Sometimes you can't. You just got to stay put. The camp has got to be there. So then you got to have stress mitigation steps to respond to stress. And it's through that physical kind of confrontation, stressor medic, a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you. So get a sprinting, get those push-ups in, and watch how much better you feel as a result. I see a lot of stressed out executives come work with me and they want to perform better. And stress is a killer. It causes a lot of visceral fat. They can be even eating a healthy diet. And that question I asked about that CEO is very appropriate. There's a lot of stress that people running large organizations, and just even if you're not running an organization, you can have life stressor and you don't know how bad it is. But that scan, I like to say, the MRI, don't let you lie. It shows you what's going on. So we do very intense analysis of our clients to figure out where this visceral fat is coming from. And that includes not only processed foods and diet, but stress, poor sleep, alcohol, and then endurance exercise, the ones that we take a look at and try to eliminate. So I'm glad you're turned on to the sprinting and push-ups and pull-ups to mitigate stress, because stress kills people. Absolutely.
I'm going to do that. The next time Nisha pisses me off, I'm just going to take off running, and she's going to be like, what just happened here? So Guzzy's got a question. And Guzzy, the answer is going to depend on where you're at now. It's going to depend on many variables. But so how many sprints and how often? So maybe let's just talk about 3 different groups. Somebody who's been completely sedentary, what would you recommend for that person to start sprinting? And when I use air quotes, I mean any of the vigorous get out of breath exercises. And then how many days a week would you recommend somebody who's just starting, who's been, doing a few push-ups and doing a little jogging, and then somebody who's been very active?
Yeah. So you're right. It's very different from people for their different situations. But one of the things about sprinting, if you look at it from an ancestral standpoint, is nature favors variety. So nature would sometimes allow us to do a short sprint. We could get away from whatever threat was attacking us. It was just a very short, quick, brief sprint. Or sometimes we'd have to sprint a lot longer. So I get my clients mixing it up, trying to do short sprints and some longer sprints. So typically, it might be as short as 3 seconds, but usually my sweet spot for a client is around 6 to 10 seconds. And about the longest I'll ever really recommend they're doing is maybe about 30 seconds, because really past 10, 12 seconds, you've gone through your glycogen if it's really 100% max effort. So you don't get much, you're not getting too much more benefit. And it's interesting that if you look at a 100-meter sprinter and a 200-meter sprinter, the 100-meter sprinter, bigger muscles,
Absolutely.
better body.
Yep.
So that 200-meter, just that additional 100 meters has degraded their body corpus, their habitus, just that much. You can see it. Google championship 200-meter sprinters, champion 100-meter sprinters. You'll see visibly why you want to have a brief, intense, maximum form of exercise, and sprinting is the best. And then if you're not experienced to it, start slow, very, very slow, accelerate, and just do a few, don't do a lot. And if you're much more accomplished, you can do some more. But the idea I tell my clients is the decision to pursue health is a journey. It's not a life switch. You slowly work that process, and you slowly adopt these kind of strategies and not go into it. And there's something about sprinting that people just launch right into it. They want to do it right away, and just be slow and purposeful in it and careful so you don't get an injury. Why don't you want an injury? Because in former days, it would kill us. I mean, we'd get eliminated from the gene pool with an injury. And as you get older and you have more visceral fat, that recovery is a lot slower. It's a lot more taxing. So just be very careful. You want to ease into the sprinting part and maximum intensity exercise part, and even fasting, a kind of hormetic process. It's not a race to add these things in. It's a process to incorporate them in, and have your race with commitment to cut out bad things, cut out the bad food, race to cut out stress, race to cut out alcohol, race to cut out poor insomnia and poor lifestyles, staying up late, watching television, gambling, or doing online gaming, or, nonsense. That's where you want to sprint, get those bad things out, and then incorporate these hormetic practices, that are brief, slowly into your life, so you can maximally benefit it while reducing your risk of injury.
Absolutely. Now, I know you're a big proponent of the MRI, and I totally understand why, but a lot of people, are somewhat limited means. Are there any tips and tricks that you found that you can reduce the cost of an MRI for somebody who's just wanting to get this done so they can see their picture? What's a good way to get the cheapest MRI possible?
No, that's so unusual. And from a clinician, an astute clinician like Dr. Berry, he's picked up some business skills. So here's what you should say, because I have clients all over the world. And this is what I tell them. You pick up the phone, you call a diagnostic center and say, what is your cheapest cost on an MRI? I want to pay cash. I'm not going to pay insurance. If you're thinking insurance company's going to pay for this, you're smoking crack. It's not going to happen.
If the patient wanted to be dishonest with the doctor, maybe you could get your insurance to pay for it. But most of the people in my tribe are not going to play that reindeer game. Yeah. And so you just call an imaging center, and any mid-sized to large city, they're going to have a diagnostic imaging center. You call them and say, hey, I'm paying cash right up front. There's no insurance bullshit here. Yeah. And so they want to ask for an abdominal, or do they want to ask for a full body?
Non-contrast MRI. So you don't need contrast. You don't want contrast. And I'll tell you up front, you're going to need a MD, a physician, to order this MRI. You won't be able to do this by yourself. foreign countries, you might be able to if you're watching Dr. Barry outside the United States, but you'll need the cooperation of your primary and tell him or her, hey, I'm really into my body. I want to get as healthy as possible. I read about visceral fat, and I hope you read about it too. You can tell me no, that you're not going to order this if you can tell me more about visceral fat than I can tell you about visceral fat. So read about visceral fat first and co-opt them to help you out. Tell them you'll pay cash. So there's no legitimate reason that I can think of a physician to say no. If a patient wants to do this and they're paying cash, they don't have to have a justification to insurance company because it's not going through insurance.
Right.
And the second thing you want to tell that MRI imaging center, besides your paying cash, is don't try to make your profit up in one scan, because I'm going to be a repeat customer for whoever gives me the lowest quote. Okay, so say that, and then they'll give you a lower quote because why? You're going to want to see that when you do these things that Dr. Barry and I've been talking about, that you're eliminating visceral fat and your muscles are getting bigger and they're losing that visceral fat and your organ fat is going away and your fat around your heart. And you'll see that in an MRI when you repeat it. So yeah, go for a repeat.
I love that. And I would recommend talking to ask for the office manager. Yeah. Or the business manager. Don't just talk to the receptionist. She's not going to be able to make that decision. Okay. But if you say, I need to speak to the office manager, please, and tell them, look, I'm going to be repeating my MRI every 3 months, every 6 months, once a year. I'm looking for the cheapest place I can get a cash money MRI of the abdomen, non-contrast. And so everybody remember, there's no radiation involved with an MR, right? So there's no danger there. And you're getting no contrast. So the gadolinium is not an issue. Yep. You're just getting the MRI. And I think an office manager would be like, so you're telling me you're going to come every 6 months for an MRI? Hold, please. And she's going to go talk to the radiologist and say, I got this kook who's going to get an MRI of the abdomen, non-contrast, every 6 months. The cheapest place is going to get his business. They're going to be like, oh, knock $200 off, not whatever. Let's get that guy in the door because, he's got some crazy friends too. That's such great advice. I love that. Now, one more newbie question. Lamada says, does sprinting improve cardiovascular health? I can answer this in one word. What about you, Dr. Amar?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So vital capacity, the maximum amount of air that you can breathe in a single breath combined with the maximum of air you can blow out in a single breath is best increased through sprinting. You move those bellows of your lungs massively. And you create that physiological demand to increase that. So it absolutely improves your cardiovascular health better than any other form of exercise. And that's what's going to most increase your longevity, your quality of your life. So sprinting is, again, your cardiovascular standpoint, knocks it out of the ballpark. I don't see anybody getting visible pulses that haven't adopted sprinting. You got to have that kind of visible vigorous exercise, maximum exercise to really get that kind of benefit.
How many of your pulses are visible to you? I can see my carotid after I've been working in the pasture, and I can see my radial most of the time, sometimes. Well, any other visible pulses on you, Dr. O'Mara, that I need to strive for? Yeah,
radial, brachial, and then my abdominal aorta. That's an awesome one. I mean, just imagine watching your abdomen bouncing up and down from the coursing blood, massively going down, big red, and then in my femorals, my iliacs before my femorals, and then in my medial thighs, and then in my medial just knees, and then my posterior tibialis and my dorsalis pedis. I got them.
I can also see my DP. I can see that as well when I come in and take my socks off. But I got to work on the femoral and the iliac and the brachial. I can't see those right now. I'm going to have to do some more sprinting. Dr. O'Mara, this has been freaking amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to share this on YouTube. Probably I'll put it up live tomorrow for everyone. But the tribe appreciates this information so much. I think this is absolutely vital. And I love the way I can tell you used to be a cop, because it's about practical solutions. How can I get from here to there with the least amount of bullshit? And that is vital for so many people out there in the world, just living a real life. it's like, yeah, don't tell me to buy this and that and that. I just want to know what are the key things I need to do. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. This has been a pleasure. Would you mind coming back sometime in the future and let's do this again?
Yeah, be my honor. I'd be happy to join you again in your tribe. It's been a real privilege to be here.
Absolutely, doctor. Thank you so much. Everybody, if you haven't already done so, share this with somebody you love. You literally could save their life by doing that. I'll see you next